right?
Yes.
Thank you. So Ruth Dike is currently a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Kentucky. She was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, but holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Honors Anthropology from University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and a Master's of Liberal Arts in Gastronomy from Boston University. She also got a Fulbright scholarship, Fulbright Hayes doctoral dissertation research abroad grant. Her dissertation explores how Moroccan family life is changing with regard to gendered negotiations of reproductive and paid labor and the cultural meaning and lived experience of contemporary middle class identities. Her research broadly explores social change in regards to the intersections of class, gender, labor, and identity. So today we are going to listen another ethnography from Morocco, and Ruth Dike. She's amazingly working for a long time at the Department of Anthropology, University of Kentucky, and especially today she is going to speak. It's an intersectionality and how the agency and intersectionality and power. It's a making middle class, contemporary middle class identities and Moroccan ethnography. So we warmly welcome Dyke. This is your time. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm sharing my PowerPoint. Okay, can y'all see it from the beginning?
Yes, Ruth. We can see.
Perfect. Great, very good. So today, so my name is Ruth Dike. I am a 6-year PhD candidate at the University of Kentucky. I am writing up my dissertation right now, and I just want to thank Aspire and Pam and Hassan for organizing this, inviting me to talk, and Dita for being the host and everything. So today I'll talk about reproductive labor and post-colonial feminist Marxist theory reflections from urban Morocco. Okay, very good. So as you can see, I'll basically talk about post-colonial anthropology, feminist anthropology, what feminism is, key concepts, main journals in feminist anthropology, what Marxist anthropology is, what feminist Marxist anthropology is, how I apply those theories to my research in Morocco, and reproductive labor and Morocco. So I did research in Morocco from, I guess, April of 2018 to September 2019, September of last year. And I was in Rabat. Obviously, I'm not a native speaker, but I learned Moroccan Arabic for the dissertation fieldwork and everything. Most of my talk is about the different theories in anthropology, and then at the end, I kind of apply it to my research. Let me know if I'm going too fast or too slow. Hopefully, I don't talk too fast. I'm very excited about feminist anthropology because obviously it's awesome and it's the best. And so, sometimes I get carried away and talk too quickly, but just let me know if that happens. So post-colonial anthropology is basically doing ethnography from the colonized point of view rather than the colonizer, and highlighting the social and political power relationships that sustain colonialism and neocolonialism. So it's often done in areas where colonialism was present and neocolonialism is currently present. you can definitely see that in my research in Morocco. And Dr. Joseph also mentioned in his presentation with his analysis of racism in France and Algeria, I think that you could say that that is also a post-colonial approach, looking at how the basically the history of colonialism and the presence of neocolonialism is affecting Algerians and French Algerians and French people today. So a lot of my examples are from the Middle East and North Africa, just because that's where I work. So I will say that in the beginning, I guess, but hopefully it can still be relevant to your work. So Orientalism by Edward Said is a really fundamental work in post-colonial anthropology. Basically, it's the idea that there's the Orient and the West, and so these Western anthropologists or historians, scholars are studying the Orient, and they're coming up with these images of the Orient. But what Edward Said found was that the images of the Orient that they portrayed were actually more of a reflection of how they saw Western society than the actual reality of the Orient or Eastern society or Near Eastern society. So basically, if the West is rational and civilized and forward thinking, then within Orientalism, then anything in the Near East is uncivilized, backwards thinking, irrational. So basically, it's just like the opposite of what they think their version of themselves is. So they're not actually talking about what's actually happening, or like what was actually happening in the East at that time. They're just like reflecting back on themselves, basically. So that was a really important critique from Edward Said about Orientalism. Another more recent one is from Chandra Mahatme. So Under Western Eyes, Feminist Scholarship and Colonial Discourses. So basically, she was saying that the Western feminists use universal methodologies that reinforce Orientalism. And so it's kind of like saying, if you don't meet my criteria of what being a Western feminist is, then your society isn't living up to being feminist. Or so oftentimes maybe people from the West would go into other contexts, and they would it would again be a case of Orientalism, where they would say, oh, these women are so oppressed, they have no agency, they can't change any things in their lives because they're surrounded by the structure of patriarchy. But they weren't actually seeing the agency of those women, and they were applying Western feminist theories to other places that didn't. It's important to consider like the context of where you're working and their theories and ideas about it. Another example is from Sabah Mahmood. So she talks about how ethnography should be an analysis as a mode of conversation rather than mastery. I just think that's a really beautiful sentence from her ethnography, Politics of Piety. And it kind of gets to the same idea again of, rather than coming in and saying, I have the most accurate or correct way of living in the world, and I'm going to teach you how to live correctly, or what true feminism means, or whatever it is. It's more about having a conversation with people rather than trying to master them in some way. The last one, again, is another pivotal piece Do Muslim Women Need Saving by Abu Lughod. So basically after 9/11 in the US and in Western media, there was a lot of negative images of Muslim women, basically saying that they are oppressed by an Islamic society and they have no agency and no way to get out, and that Western imperial forces need to save them, potentially through the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, from their patriarchal societies, bringing democracy to them and Western feminism. But Abu Lughod really critiques this, saying that Muslim women don't need to be saved. There are many long histories of Islamic feminism from the very beginning of Islam. So there's different ways of looking at things. So I hope that you get an idea of what post-colonial anthropology is from that. So thinking about the history of colonialism in a certain place, and also highlighting the social and political power relationships that sustain colonialism and neocolonialism currently. So the next thing that we'll talk about is feminist anthropology. So why do we need feminist anthropology? So in the beginning of anthropology, way back in the late 19th century, early 20th century, there were a lot of male anthropologists doing ethnography, and they mostly talked to men. And so they were writing these broad, overarching arguments about the entirety of Papua New Guinea society is based on these things, and that's because I talked to these 50 men. And so they're saying these broad overarching statements, but they're actually only talking to half of the population. So they're not getting the views and thoughts and desires of the female population. And so in anthropology, that's it's crucial to think about both male and female perspectives, and any in between genders. So feminist theory is examining the nature of gender inequality in all its forms. So that's everything from gender inequality in pay, women getting paid less than men for doing the same work. You can think about reproductive labor. You can think about domestic violence. Women are subjugated more to domestic violence across the world. So feminist anthropologists often divide up feminist theory into three main waves. So the first wave is late 19th century, early 20th century, and that was basically feminist organizing for the right to vote in America and the US. And the second wave is in the 1960s and the 1970s. So that was The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir and Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. So these books were basically talking about the inequality of women in society. And Betty Friedan specifically was talking about basically how society expects us to sit at home and be housewives and be content with taking care of our families and husbands and children. But we would rather be working. We want more to do in life, that sort of thing. As you can see, it was very Western, white, middle-class focused. And the third wave from the 1990s to the present kind of critiqued the second wave for being so white and middle class and Western focused, basically saying that that Friedan and these other second wave feminists were kind of universalizing their experiences as white middle-class Western women to like every single woman in the world, saying that everyone has these experiences, not realizing that, hey, there are a lot of Black women in America who don't have that same experience, who have been working since day one to support their families and have a very different experience of gender equality and racial inequality in the US and other places. I also just wanted to point out basically that it's kind of showing it as like first wave, second wave, third wave, and it's chronological. And it seems like feminism is getting better. But scholars also critique that teleological approach. So basically, they critique the idea that it is getting better and chronological and like kind of like linear, instead arguing that feminism in the world today kind of like it'll get better and then it'll get worse and then it'll get better and then maybe it'll go this way and then it'll go this way and then so it kind of like moves all around, but it's not just like one line that is slowly getting better throughout time. Yeah, I think that's an important point to make. So this slide is basically talking about different important concepts in feminist anthropology. So gender roles are really important. Feminist anthropologists tend to talk about them a lot. The gender roles are basically the rights and responsibilities as well as behaviors deemed generally acceptable and appropriate or desirable for a man or a woman. So basically, what society says is appropriate for a man to do, appropriate for a woman to do, maybe appropriate for an intersex individual to do at different times. So thinking about how gender roles change over time is really important, because it's thinking about how culture changes over time and can have really meaningful impacts in people's lives. Gender performance is an idea set forth by Judith Butler in her 1999 book, Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity. So that's basically the idea that we perform our gender, that we do gender, we construct it on a daily basis in our everyday lives. So that is, instead of me being feminine all the time and being the essence of a feminine woman all the time, it's showing like my agency in the situation as far as me performing sometimes femininity, sometimes masculinity, maybe androgynous characters, performing that differently. So this morning when I chose to put on earrings was a way of me performing my gender for this meeting that we're having this morning. Another awesome concept is intersectionality. I think intersectionality is really important. It's also one of the biggest concepts that you see in feminist anthropology. It's been around since the 90s. I mean, you can also say Combahee River Collectives, maybe since the 70s, but basically Kimberly Crenshaw, 1991, Black feminist theorist, coined it and said that intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender, creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination. So basically, that is talking about different ways of looking at people's different aspects of people's social identity. So previously, scholars were kind of like, okay, I'm just going to think about class, and that's the most important thing in this situation. I'm a Marxist anthropologist, and I only care about class. Or I'm a feminist anthropologist, and I only care about gender. So I'm only going to look at gender. Or I'm an anthropologist of religion, and I only care about religion. So I'm only going to look at how Sunni Muslims are treated differently from Shia Muslims, or whatever it is. But basically, intersectionality is saying that you have to look at the intersecting and overlapping natures of people's identities to really get a full picture of it. So instead of just looking at someone's social class, you also have to think about their gender and their race and all the other axes of their social identity to think about how they are living their lives, how they are differentially privileged or not privileged in society, depending on what their axes are. And it's really complicated because, I mean, like, obviously, so if you take me, like, I am a white middle class female. So maybe because, or definitely because I'm white and middle class, I'm more privileged, but maybe because I'm a woman, I'm a little bit less privileged. So it's complicated. And basically, this idea came from Black feminists saying, hey, white feminists, your experiences aren't the same as ours. And us being Black matters. And it has very real implications for our lives. So, yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Another important idea in feminist anthropology is queer anthropology. So Bollerstoff talks about this in a review article from 2007. Basically, queer anthropology explains the conditions that shape queer life. But I would also say that people kind of use it as a verb in some ways of saying, like, I'm going to queer feminism, or I'm going to queer capitalism. And basically the idea of that is sort of flipping something on its head. So in queer anthropology, instead of assuming that everyone is heterosexual, then queering it would kind of decenter heterosexuality and say, like, oh, actually, people have a variety of different sexualities. Some people are bisexual or identify as gay or queer, or, you know, there's a huge variety of that, and it's decentering heterosexuality. So it's decentering the main thing about it. So you could say queering masculinity studies would maybe mean like queering the hegemonic discourse of what a man should be. So the gender role of like what an ideal man should be in a particular place at a particular time. So that kind of leads into masculinities. Men are gatekeepers for gender inequality. So Connell has talked about this for a while. They're a masculinities scholar. So basically, Connell's point is that men have the power in the world, and to change gender inequality, we need to get men on board with wanting to change gender inequality. And so it's really important to talk to men. Which sounds really simple and like kind of obvious of like, okay, at the beginning of feminist anthropology, we were saying we need to talk to women. Now we're saying we need to talk to men too. But a lot of feminist anthropology, especially in the Middle East and North Africa region for a very long time, has kind of used gender as code for women. So it's important to realize that men's identities are just as constructed as women's identities, and they're also differentially privileged or disadvantaged in different ways. Yeah, I also wanted to mention for intersectionality, it kind of relates back to Dr. Daniel Joseph's talk about how someone can be Arab and French at the same time, or Muslim and French, and maybe racially profiled in different ways because of that. And their intersection of those two identities or matter a lot, instead of just thinking about their French identity and just thinking about their Algerian identity or Arab identity or whatever it is. So that is the important concepts in feminist anthropology. Briefly, if you wanted to look more at feminist anthropology, I would look up the journal Signs, the Journal of Women in Culture and Society. So this journal has been around for a very long time. As you can see, it's been around since 1981. And the Journal of Middle Eastern Women's Studies is also a great journal. It hasn't been around for quite as long, but it does have a lot of excellent feminist anthropology articles. So if you're looking to read more recent literature, I would look those up. So next, we're going to talk about Marxist anthropology. So Marxist anthropology is examining the ways material forces cause social transformation, especially concerned with social class conflict, power, economics, production, and distribution. So basically, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848. And they were basically arguing that there were different economic systems that were really important for society and class, and the way that different classes were formed and thought about each other in relation to one another. So according to Marx and Engels, in the time period of capitalism is basically capitalism is an inherently exploitive economic system where the means of production are privately owned by the bourgeoisie and used to extract surplus value greater than the workers' wages. So the kind of typical example of this is to think about a factory in the late 19th century where the bourgeoisie, the middle class, upper middle class, owns the factory, and they also own the raw materials. So the means of production is tools and technologies which production is being completed, and the raw materials that are being transformed during production. So it's both the actual factory and whatever raw materials are being used. So the bourgeoisie owns both of those things, and then workers, the proletariat, who don't own private property, come in and work for a specific amount of time, and then create some kind of finished product. And then the bourgeoisie sells that finished product and makes a profit on it. So by making a profit on it, they're extracting surplus value from the proletariat or from the worker. So because the price that they're selling that product at is higher than what they're actually paying all of their employees, then that means that capitalism is inherently an exploitive process, and it is exploiting its workers. And so basically, Marx and Engels argued that once capitalism got running, and once the proletariat was aware of their presence in society and how they were being exploited by the bourgeoisie, they would rise up and do a communist revolution, right? So obviously this played out a little bit differently than maybe Marx and Engels envisioned in the very beginning. But it's important to think about Marxist anthropology still today because it thinks about the history of class relations, and it also thinks about the economics of society a lot, and and kind of like traces the power dynamics in between society of like who owns the means of production, how does that work, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of why Marxist anthropologists, and this is just a very, very basic, very beginning level version of Marxist anthropology. If you want to read more, I would encourage you to read the Communist Manifesto, read Das Kapital if your heart is set on it. And then, yeah, you'll get to know more about it and think about all the intricacies that go with it. So feminist Marxist anthropology So they use feminism to analyze Marxist theory. And it's basically arguing that women are exploited through capitalism and through the individual ownership of property, of private property, because especially for a long time, women weren't allowed to own private property, and so only men had the access to those means of production, that factory and raw materials that I was talking about, and so it had important implications for their lives and gender inequality. So women were also exploited in the system of capitalism. A lot of Marxist anthropologists today have also talked about the feminization of labor. So I guess I'll approve. Okay. Yeah, so talking about the feminization of labor, basically capitalism exploits labor by saying, oh, women have nimble fingers and so they're better at working in the factory, but they're also not supporting a family at home, so we're going to pay them less. So that's sort of another reason or way that anthropology can, of Marxist anthropology theory can be applied to different contexts throughout the world. Another important point is that women's work in biological and social reproduction is a necessary element of all modes of production, but it's often ignored by Marxist anthropologists. So in order to keep society going, women have to make babies to continue the reproduction of humans and all that kind of stuff. And they also women also work for the social reproduction. So in order to make the social reproduction happen, women do reproductive labor. So reproductive labor is the unpaid and paid labor associated with caregiving and domestic roles, including but not limited to cleaning, cooking, and childcare. So in order for society to work and capitalism to work and the proletariat to be able to go to work every day, he needs someone at home, potentially keeping the house clean and cooking the meals, and raising children in order to continue that family, but also continue making workers for capitalism to work and continuing for them to be able to be paid cheap labor. And while women do that unpaid reproductive labor at home. So you can see how women's labor is really important for the reproduction of society. That's what feminist Marxist anthropologists are arguing. So men do not share reproductive labor at an equivalent rate to women, even as more women around the world enter the paid workforce. So that's true in all the countries worldwide, regardless of how progressive they are, even if we're talking about the Scandinavian countries, which are fairly gender equal in most ways, but women still do the majority of reproductive labor, even if they are the main breadwinner, even if they are the only breadwinner. All these cases, women still do the majority of the cooking, cleaning, and childcare throughout the world. So feminist Marxist anthropologists are like, hey, that's not fair, that's not okay. And so Barrett contends that the liberation of women would require the redivision of childcare responsibilities to be shared among women and men, that the assumed or actual dependence of women upon men economically be abolished, and that the ideology of gender be transformed. So Barrett is completely against women relying on men economically, and she thinks that all reproductive labor should be shared equally among the sexes, among men and women. So moving on to, maybe I need to exit there. Okay. Yes, so applying post-colonial theory to Morocco. So this is the point where I'm actually applying some of those theories to my fieldwork in Morocco. So I mostly interviewed I interviewed married Moroccans who are middle class and working class, and to apply post-colonial theory in Morocco, I needed to be aware of the history of the Spanish and French colonialism in Morocco, as well as the Western feminist ideologies popular in leftist women's organizations. So you can argue that that how dominant Western feminist ideals are, especially in like development discourse throughout the world, and different ways. You can argue that that is sort of similar to colonialism in certain ways, as far as saying that this is the correct way to have gender equality in your country, or these are the correct theories to believe. And it's also really important to think about how structures of power uphold neocolonialism, and also how Moroccans resist this. So I think I can think about how in Morocco, if you speak French, you have the better French you speak, generally the better social class you are. So if you're really rich, then you speak really perfect French, and maybe you get to vacation in France or Spain or America or Australia or wherever if you have money to. And the more lower class you are in Morocco, the more likely you are not to know French very well, because the Moroccan public education system is not great at teaching French. And people end up learning modern standard Arabic, Fusha, better, and also Moroccan Arabic, and also indigenous languages, Tamazight as well. So you can kind of see that that's a legacy of colonialism in Morocco. And one way that Moroccans resisted is that they decide to learn English because they think that it's more useful than French. And so they'll be on YouTube or wherever, and they just teach themselves English, and then they speak perfect English, and it's amazing. I will stop this tangent of how amazing Moroccan language is, but there is a lot of literature out there on it if you want to read more. It's pretty amazing. And also thinking back to Orientalism, Morocco is not the antithesis of Western thinking or Western thought. So recognizing that Morocco can be modern and rational and civilized, and is rational and modern and civilized, while at the same time being Islamic and a monarchy and all these other different things. So it's not always like a binary of like one or the other. So next, thinking about applying feminist Marxist theory to my fieldwork in Morocco. So I have to be aware of my positionality as a white American married woman. So I definitely have a lot of power in Morocco, I would say, as a white woman. So it's important to make sure that people are giving consent, and that I actively seek consent throughout the process and not just at the beginning. And that people are comfortable talking with me and aren't just doing it because they feel like they have to, or they think I'm associated with the government or anything like that. So making sure that people are comfortable with it. I definitely was able to talk to more women and more married women because I am also a married woman. And so I was able to say like, hey, what's it like in your household? How do you do the dishes and cook and everything like that? And share my experiences as well. It wasn't just like one-sided, let me get into the nitty-gritty details of your married life without sharing anything, because that could also be awkward. So feminist Marxist theory is the background for my research, but I don't center equal distribution of reproductive labor as the ultimate ideal. Instead, I center participants' desires, goals, and ideologies. So So basically, instead of saying that every woman should work outside and equal distribution of reproductive labor is the only way for gender equality to happen in the world, I think about it rather as trying to create a more just world for everyone, and also thinking about what would make the people that I talk to most happy, most fulfilled, and also not feeling like their labor is being exploited. So I think that I think throughout the world, if someone wants to stay at home while the other spouse works, I think that that should be valued and respected. So if you want to be a housewife, that's totally awesome and should be valued and respected in society. And if you want to be a house husband, that's also awesome and should also be valued and respected in society as well. And so thinking about the people that I talk to, thinking about their desires, goals, and ideologies, Morocco is a 99% Muslim, Sunni Muslim, Maliki state. And so a lot of people did talk about what the Quran says are the specific rights and responsibilities of men and women. So the chapter, the women's chapter, the Surat An-Nisa, ayah 34, so the verse 34, basically translates to men are the protectors and maintainers of women. And most of the people that I talked to interpreted that verse to mean that women should take care of men, or men should take care of women financially, should take care of the household financially, and that in so that's the rights, that those are the responsibilities of the man, and the responsibilities of the women were to take care of the children. So that is how most people that I talked to saw their rights and responsibilities within their society. So thinking about reproductive labor in Morocco. So my larger dissertation is we have about 5 minutes left or so. So we're getting close to the end, don't worry. But I look forward to all of your questions. But basically, my dissertation is looking at how Moroccan family life is changing with regards to gendered negotiations of reproductive and paid labor and cultural meanings and lived experiences of contemporary middle class identities. So there have been a lot of there's been a lot of quantitative research on reproductive labor, specifically looking at the very numbers focused, as far as women do 67% of the labor and men do 20% or whatever it is. But quantitative approaches often simply determine factors that increase or decrease reproductive labor in the household. Instead, this chapter uses a grounded theory approach to examine how couples negotiate reproductive labor together when tensions arise surrounding reproductive labor and the strategies they use to mitigate those tensions. So grounded theory approach is basically talking about building theory from the ground up instead of coming in with a specific idea. It's looking at your data and having kind of a dialectical relationship between your data and theory. So talking to your participants and saying, hey, I was thinking about this. What do you think about that? Going back and looking at your data and using that to create grounded theory. And so what I found was that younger middle-class men who about 30, 40 years old, are more willing to do some reproductive labor, mostly childcare, compared to their father's generation, who were 50 and up usually. So this is showing how in Moroccan society, what it means to be a good father is changing over time. So yeah, I think it's important and interesting research. I hope that you also think that. But we talked about post-colonial theory, feminist Marxist theory, and my research shows that the division of labor in Morocco is changing, but women still do the vast majority of reproductive labor, while also often participating in the paid labor force. So I'm hoping that you got an idea of what those theories mean, some key terms, and hopefully you can apply them to your research and or think about them more. So that is it. These are all the different people that I cited. And then my last page is just a thank you, and feel free to contact me. That's my email, mruthdike@uky.edu. So thank you so much, and I am ready for questions.
Thank you so much. It was really great talk. There is one question for you. So during these kind of reports coming up every day of sexual harassments and bad reputation for misogyny, so how it is safe or unsafe for a woman to travel or work or live there as a citizen or as foreigners?
Yeah, definitely. Is that it? Is that all of it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry. Yeah, so I would say as a white married woman, I didn't get a whole lot of sexual harassment compared to like when I first started going to Morocco. So I first went there to study abroad in 2011. And I feel like it's like the younger that you are and like the more that they think that it, like the young boys, the like youth, the shabab, what if they think that it's a possibility, then they're more likely to hound you kind of. And but I think that's true for both foreign Moroccan women and or foreign women in Morocco and Moroccan women in Morocco, where men will follow them in the streets. I think it's getting like a little bit better over the years as far as like what women feel comfortable wearing. I feel like I see more skin than I did 8, 9 years ago, but maybe that's also because like maybe I've gotten more conservative. I don't know. But I mean, other friends have also said that. That is very like anecdotal. I think that it's worse in Egypt, and um, I don't know what it's like in India. So I mean, people could tell me about that maybe, but yeah.
Thank you so much. Uh, are there any more questions?
I have a question. Um, Hi, and thank you so much for your presentation. I really liked it, and the way you detail your approaches, and it really shows that you are on a good way for your dissertation. So, yeah, my question is about I think this piece you brought from Abulugo, do women needs Muslim women, okay, need saving? Yeah, I was wondering with the pandemic, the conception that people had, for example, of the veil. So I mean, um, how they conceive it, especially Westerners. I mean, outsiders. So I was wondering if the way that the pandemic is changing our behaviors, like we are wearing face masks and gloves in public, if that doesn't challenge, for example, previous conception of people who wear like veils or burqa or yeah, those kind of things, for example, in like non-Western societies.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I think it's interesting. So right, I guess when or like a month after the pandemic hit, like once the CDC and people were recommending that everyone wear face masks all the time, there were a lot of TikToks and social media videos saying that, oh, look, the pandemic is also saying that women should cover up their faces, and this is just justification for wearing the niqab, which is basically like only showing your eyes. But it's interesting because in France, the head coverings and or the niqab specifically, where you can like only see the eyes, is still banned, but you still have to wear a face mask. So it's like it's literally simultaneously saying like it's not actually about face coverings. It's just about us saying that it's not okay to be Muslim in French society, and but you still need to wear a face mask, but only in the way that we deem appropriate as the French government, as the majority says you should be wearing it like this, and showing the rest of your face. Yeah, but I do think it'll be interesting to see how society changes because of the face mask. A friend sent me a meme saying that like if we wear face masks for 10 years, our children are going to be like, so are mouths like private parts? And so it's just like interesting thinking about how society will change. I think that like the niqab isn't super popular in Morocco, but a lot of people do wear the hijab, which is just the covering over your head. And it's become more popular in the past like 10, 20 years, kind of like the pushback from other Western countries and 9/11 saying like, how Muslim are you going to be? And so people kind of swinging towards becoming more Muslim and more conservative. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Can I have one?
Yes, sir. Yes, of course.
I really enjoyed listening to Ruth. And as a human being, we all have been brought up with certain mindset, particularly we the social scientists. We are often charged more with the emotion than in the reality. I know about myself. For example, if you say that in the classroom or in the club or in the society, if you say we all are equal, everyone will say yes, yes, we all are equal. There should not be any hierarchy. Yes, yes, there should not be any hierarchy. But the reality is that none of us are equal. None of us are equal. No male can equate with female. Neither female can equate with that. It cannot be. There has to be equity, not equality. So see, the first shock I got when I started working outside anthropology, and then they say, how can you say we all are equal? In an organization, everyone is a chairman or everyone is a sweeper. All are equal? No. So this is nature's law. We are not equal. This is first law of nature. Second law of nature is struggle for existence. The power, the politics, it will remain as long as human society remains. The power game is in the department of organization. The power game is in the society. The power game is in the family. Yeah, we play power in the family also. So the power game is there. Then what we have to do? We have to maintain the equilibrium. Equilibrium. How long, how far, how much. And that is very, very important for any society to understand about the gender justice. I believe in gender justice, not feminism. Now, gender justice is a question of equity, not equality. Again, the power of hierarchy will remain. So we have to see the equilibrium. That means I, you, everyone has got some freedom. So we also advocate for the freedom. But my dear friend, nature's law again, there is a degree of freedom. We cannot go without that. We cannot work. We have flexibility in the system to move, but without violating the constraint imposed on all that. Everyone has got a rule to follow. I have got freedom to wear my dress, but how short will be my shorts? How tall will be my will be under the norms. So equilibrium is there. We cannot talk of we are all equal, we are all free. We cannot be. The equilibrium is there. So I was very happy to listen to you. And finally, in the last, you mentioned that you are not advocacy center for equal. For that, I was very happy. So we often, as a sociologist, anthropologist, we talk of equality, which should not be. There should be equity. We talk of no hierarchy. There cannot be any society without hierarchy. We talk, we all are free, but there is a degree of freedom. And one has to play the role depending on the constraint imposed on that. These three things are very important for biological science, social science, and even economics also. Finally, the bourgeois, the capitalist will remain. We don't like it, but it will remain. Here again, we have to come the degree of freedom. How much capital, how much bourgeois power will be there, how much labor will be there. The labor should get justified payment. Justified payment. There again, equity, not equality. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I thought I'll share. I often get charged with emotion when people talk on these issues, since I was working more outside anthropology with the management, with the industry, with the forest department, with the ecologists. Their equity, equilibrium is there. And the last point, we all have to pay price. Nothing is free. And that is the concept of trade-off. Trade-off. How much you'll be paying against what? But we have to pay the trade-off. So these concept has to be very clear with the anthropology, issue of equality and equity, issue of hierarchy and justice, issue of capital and equity, and finally paying price, trade-off. We have to understand. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Those are really interesting and helpful. Yeah. Yeah, talking about the equilibrium, I feel like a lot of people, a lot of Moroccans that I talked about like the rights and responsibilities of men and women, rather than talking about like, I have the right to do this because I'm a woman. It was kind of like paired with the rights and responsibilities. And yeah, I think like talking about equity and being fair is really important for reproductive labor to kind of work towards just distribution of labor. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be 50-50 at all times. Actually, the couples that I talked to that were like most successful in the division of reproductive labor, where they felt like, I guess the best about it was when the couples were actively helping one another. So it wasn't about like, I did the dishes and you've never done the dishes, or I cooked dinner last night, or I cleaned the car and you never do X, Y, and Z. It was like, this person is struggling, I want to help them, they're my partner. It was about like helping each other as partners, which I think is really important. Yeah, I think it is important to think about what people's definition of fair is, what people's definition of equity is, because I think that can change depending on the person. And like, yes, obviously power is really important, and people are always going to have more power or less power in society. But at the same time, I still think it's important to highlight the voices of people who have less power in society and try to work towards changing society in a way that the people who have less power get more power, and the people who have a lot of power maybe get a little bit less power. But those are all like really hard things to do. So it's a big deal. And thinking about like the end of capitalism potentially, diverse economies, Gibson Graham talk about how we don't just do capitalism every day. Like there's other ways, like informal reciprocity of like, I give you some muffins, then you give me some butter, or, you know, whatever it is. I'll stop talking, but thank you so much for your comments.
I want to add for the Ruth explanation, I just want to add some more points that saying that sometimes it's very difficult to assuming different ethnographic or cultural location from our presuppositions which we have been adapted in a particular cultural context, and assuming other cultures, it's a really challenging, and it's very difficult. For example, say, how do you define equality? How do you define equity? It's a completely cultural experience. So the modern anthropological theory, it's a question, it's a challenge, because I mean, you are speaking about the different ethnographic locations. So I think it's very difficult to compare. That's why we need anthropology cross-cultural comparison, because we cannot like presuppositions. We cannot that say no. It has to be. That's a wrong perception in anthropology that I believe in my practice. Thank you so much.
Excellent points. Thank you, Pamela-san.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I would like to add something to it. I think it's very interesting. So talking about like equality and equity. So I would say that so we cannot really understand equality based on a biological scope. I think we need to see how equality is also constructed in society, and it is very political. So that means some societies that, for example, give certain like political dominance to a category of people. So we will see that the inequality will be widened. So that means it will increase, right? So that means, but society can take action to close the gap. That means to decrease inequalities. So if we think of inequality only in terms of like a biological dimension, so we won't see how societies contribute, okay, to increasing inequalities. Sometimes it is based on our political choices. Okay, it is how we conceive of people. I think it's the same thing as gender, the way we define it, okay, biologically or beyond the biological scope. So I think that the question of equity can even contribute to closing the gap, okay, of inequalities, I mean, in society. Yeah. For example, if we consider different groups of people in society, like disabled people and people who are not really disabled. So, and you have economic resources. That mean people who are mostly, that mean physically disabled, maybe in a lower position to reach these economic resources. So if we create a ladder, so that will allow, I mean, these people, okay, to reach these economic resources the same way as other people. So the thing is that we need a society that creates, I mean, a frame where everyone can reach, like, I mean, resources. So that means this will increase inequality in society. That means if we are thinking of inequality, so inequity, we have to think it not just in biological terms. We have to think of the role of society in increasing and decreasing inequality. So if we stick to the biological dimension, we will say only it is, we will be very indifferent. So we will say that, okay, it's okay because that's the way it was decided. It's really natural. So we need to challenge that. We need a society that really contributes to closing the gaps by establishing a sort of frame that allow people with different conditions to be in a position to enjoy like equal opportunities in society.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that's exactly what feminist anthropology is talking about, as far as like challenging the idea that there are natural differences between males and females, or people of different races. Like there's no biological differences for that. Challenging, like kind of peeling off the veil and saying, like, actually, this is society telling us that this is the natural thing for a man to do, and this is the natural thing for a woman to do.
Can I one point? Hello.
Yeah.
We have human being, biological species first. So we are governed by the rule of biological norm. We can choose what to eat, but we have to eat. And we have to eat those things only which is nutritious, which is adaptable to my biological need, not my social need. I have to eat according to my biological need. Social needs gives option. So the social norms, social institutions are constructed based on the biological need and survival need. Brilliant example, the emergence of coronavirus. This had hit our biological entity, our body, our breathing. So we are modifying our social behavior, social distancing. We are changing our economic activities to suit our biological need. We can't compromise. What kind of oxygen we're breathing? Oxygen only breathing, nothing else. So we as an anthropologist must understand that anthropology is a subject biosocial study. I advocate from the beginning. I may not become a good physiologist, I may not be a good anatomist, but I must as an anthropologist understand the basic biological need of human. If I do not understand, I cannot do good ethnography, how the villagers are practicing their ecological activities, economic activities to suit their biological need. That is very, very important. Second point, that means biological needs are primary, social needs, social construct are to favor our biological survival. This is the first understanding. Second understanding, when we talk of ecology, the nature has number of parts to make a system. In that case, human is also one part in the ecological system. So ecological functioning is all the natural phenomenon process where social activities are also taken together. So ecological is the social activity of human society play and the biological need. That makes the ecology. Ecology is not only plant and our environment. Ecology is all the biological activities with the social of human being makes the ecology. So I wanted to emphasize on the understanding of biological need is important, and all social constructs can be modified. It emerges meeting the need of the biological requirement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for making your point. Um, we have one more question that during this pandemic situation, do you find any increased cases of domestic violence?
Yes. I don't know about the numbers for Morocco specifically, but I would definitely venture to think that I would theorize that domestic violence has probably gone up throughout the world in social distancing, social like self-quarantining instances, just because there's a lot more ability to potentially control someone's actions and a lot more stress on everyone in the family, economic stress, health stress, all those things. So yeah, I know that definitely in the U.S. Domestic violence has gone up, and I would think that is also going up elsewhere in the world as well.
Thank you. And is there any special economic zones in Morocco?
Yeah, there is. There's definitely a special economic zone up in the north in Tangier, which is a pretty international city. They have like a specific port that is like specifically a special economic zone, and it's supposed to be a really big port. And I'm sure that there are other ones too. I feel like there's probably also some in Casablanca. Yeah, there's a lot of public-private partnerships in Morocco, and I would say that neoliberalism is going strong in Morocco.
So, do you find any gender equality among the employees, the wages, and everything over there in sexual harassment or dominance thing?
Yeah, definitely. Like I had a friend who experienced different sexual harassment at work, kind of because she was a woman. Basically, they would treat her differently because of what she was wearing. Saying like, "Oh, that's not professional, so I get to hit on you as your boss," even though it's pretty inappropriate. And I definitely think that the kind of ideology of it's okay to pay women less because they're not supporting a family, that whole ideology is definitely common in Morocco, even though women do support their entire families sometimes because men can't find work sometimes. But employers potentially like use that as a way of justifying like, oh, you probably have a husband at home or a dad or someone else who has a real job supporting you. So it's fine for us to not pay you well.
Okay. So, have you find socially constructed roles among both the genders, and how is it different from each other?
Yeah, so I think that it's really diverse, depending on even like where you're talking about. So I was in Rabat, so it's the capital city of Morocco, and talking with like middle class Moroccans, there was a lot of exposure to a variety of different like media sources like K-pop and Netflix and Hollywood and Bollywood and soap operas and Turkish soap operas. So like all the influences, right? But so what are the gender roles? Yeah, so I would say it also like depends on the person, but in general, people expect a Muslim Moroccan woman to want to get married and have children and to have a family. Although I did talk to some people who didn't want to get married, some women who didn't want to get married, they didn't see the point in it. And men tend to get married a little bit later in life once they're like settled down. But it's hard for people to like attain the status of being married because you have to have such like economic stability for it of like, okay, I'm gonna buy an apartment for my family to live in. But it's hard to like attain that economic position because it's hard to like find a really good job. And so because of that, more women are working, participating in the paid labor force outside the home, and trying to like get at all the markers of middle class identity. And like sending your kids to like a private school is also really important to make sure that they have like a better education and a better future. Yeah, that was kind of roundabout. I hope I answered your question.
Right. So, what do you think about pseudo-feminism?
So that is like fake feminism. I guess I'm not super familiar with the term. I don't know if you want to, whoever asked the question, to talk about it for a little bit.
Yeah, the person can really ask or throw some light upon it. I will request the participant to ask or give us some explanation about it. Swapnil Sharma. He has asked this question. Swapnil, are you there? Anyways, okay. Swapnil, you can unmute yourself and you can, really speak to her. Yeah, he's talking, it's like, it is something like fake feminism, and do you find such cases there?
So I would say that the Moroccans that I talked to didn't necessarily identify themselves as
Ruth,
feminists.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for a while?
Yeah, please do.
I'm sorry, could you ask that person to explain, first of all, what does it mean by pseudo-feminism or fake feminism? Could you explain it? Not you, the person who asked the question. Could you explain what is pseudo-feminism first? Then you can go ahead. I think it's really good. Ask the person to explain what is pseudo-feminism or fake feminism. I'm very sorry to interrupt.
Oh, not at all.
Anajita, could you please ask the person to define what is fake or pseudo-feminism?
Swapnil, can you please unmute yourself?
That might be helpful for Ruth. That's why I'm interrupting.
Yeah. Swapnil, I have unmuted you. Can you please? I guess the person doesn't want to speak.
No, he can type. It's no problem, Anajita. He can simply type how he has written the questions.
Yeah.
The same way he write, no problem. What is fake feminism or pseudo-feminism? I am also very happy to learn that definition. That's why I'm asking. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So till the time he writes, we can take the next question. So what would be your suggestions for the wellness and the welfare of the Moroccan people, the people you are working upon?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great question. I would, thinking about the different economic situations, I think that Moroccan government should tax the wealthy more and so tax the wealthy and especially tax foreign companies and foreign investors in order to invest in social welfare programs. It's really complicated. I don't think that's like a silver bullet perfect explanation, because at the same time, if you tax foreign businesses more, it also probably means less jobs for Moroccans who really need jobs right now. There is a high unemployment rate, especially for young Moroccans, as we see similarly in other places in the Middle East and North Africa region. So that's tough. And then, so that's like on a very like large structural level, like invest in infrastructure, jobs, healthcare, education is really important to make sure that they are teaching kids English and maybe choosing 1 to 2 languages instead of trying to focus on like 4 or 5. I don't know. It's tough and it's complicated. And then on like a more individual level, I would encourage individual partners not to try to count or like tally up like I did the dishes 5 times this week, or I cleaned the restroom and you never did. I mean, obviously to be like open and honest if you feel like the situation is not fair in some way, but also just to think about it in like as loving way as possible, and think about like every member of the household is like responsible for the household, and how can we all make this work together in like a positive way. I feel like that's a very like kumbaya, love, happy suggestion, but that's what people told me, so I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
Okay, so here comes the explanation. Sometimes people who are interested in feminism sometimes are of the view that everywhere women are being oppressed, but not the case is that sometimes false allegations are also there against males and also females for their own agenda. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that at least for the people that I was talking to, I don't think that anyone would call themselves a fake feminist. Yeah, it wasn't like there's